Next up, we have Callista, who is going to be talking about Apple's private cloud compute. So, round of applause.
So, I didn't test it with the clicker, so I hope it works fine. Hello. So, welcome to my talk. It's all fun and games, analyzing the authentication protocol in Apple's private cloud compute. And who am I? I'm Callista. I'm currently studying in Germany in Potsdam, and I'm doing my master's at the University of Potsdam. I enjoy cryptography, and this talk will be about cryptography, but we will stay very high level, so I hope you can take something interesting with you today. You even see this little red guy here is the unofficial mascot of the cryptography community. So you will see him throughout the whole presentation. He's quite cute. And yeah, the last half year I've been busy analyzing the authentication protocol of Apple's private cloud compute, and I've not been doing this alone, so I want to give a quick shout out to Margarete and Nilu, who accompanied me along this journey, and of course thank my supervisors for helping me, and Yannick, who helped us reverse engineer some things. So yeah, let's dive right into it. And to talk about Apple's private cloud compute, we have to start by looking at Apple Intelligence. I think you've all heard about it. It's like Apple's new artificial intelligence that can help you write tools, prioritize notifications, and create images. Yeah, so what's the deal now with private cloud compute? Apple wants to do like this whole artificial intelligence thing, but privacy preserving. For this, they have the following approach. If you want to use Apple Intelligence and what you're trying to do does not need so much computational power, you can just compute it on device. So your data stays locally with you and is not being sent anywhere. If the request, maybe if you're rewriting a text, it does need more computational power and it needs to be sent to like a cloud service to be computed, and Apple has private cloud compute for this. And I brought you here like their promises that they're advertising for private cloud compute. They say that your data is never stored, that it's only used for your requests, and that they have verifiable privacy promises. And for the last point, verifiable privacy promises, we tried to verify this claim. Yeah, so this is an authentication problem, and we looked at only the authentication for this project. We cryptographers like to think about what parties do we have here and what do these parties want. In this case, we have the user, and the user wants to stay anonymous in some capacity. And on the other hand, we have Apple's private cloud compute that only wants certified users to be actually able to use the service. Of course, this problem does not only concern artificial intelligence. So actually, we are looking at cloud computing, but privacy preserving. And this does sound like a contradiction at first sight, because of course I have to show Apple who I am so that they know that I can access the service. So how are we supposed to make this privacy preserving? And for this, I want to do a small cryptography crash course into like the standard way to do this, to achieve privacy preserving authentication. And it's called blind signatures. Maybe some of you have heard of it. I will still explain it from the very beginning here. On the one hand, we have the user. They have some authentication information that enables them to use some service, in this case, Apple's private cloud compute. And we have Apple that they want to send their request to. Of course, we still have to send our authentication information somewhere. But first of all, we will create like a number. You can imagine this as some kind of voucher code. So this is a voucher that you later want to redeem. But because Apple is not supposed to know your voucher code, you generate it on your own and blind it. Of course, we live in like the digital environment right now, so we can't simply black out the code we are sending, sadly. So we have to blind it some other way. For example, you could add a random number to it, and nobody would know your original number. Now, the user sends their authentication information alongside the blinded voucher to a signing server. This server can now verify that you are authorized to use the service, and if you are authorized to use the service, they can sign your blinded voucher for you. Important here is the signing service only sees your authentication information and this blinded voucher, but nothing else. The user can now just unblind the signed voucher they received back, or token, and now they have a valid voucher or signature, like we like to call it. Of course, it's important to note that the signing here and the certificate is not destroyed by the blinding process. So unblinding the token here does not destroy the validity of the voucher. So now comes the part that we've been all waiting for. We want to query the cloud service, for example, private cloud compute, and we do that by simply sending this code. Apple now does not receive any authentication information with this. They really just receive this signed number and nothing else. So now we, of course, have to define, because I'm a cryptographer, I have to define what properties this protocol has to fulfill. Like I said, we have these two different perspectives on this problem. On the one hand, we have the user, they want to stay private. So what does privacy mean in this context? Because we do send our authentication information to the signing server, so we can't completely stay anonymous in this case. What we do not want, though, is that if we send our signed token to Apple, that Apple can then cross-match this number to like the authentication information we sent in the first phase, because then they would know who this request comes from. So we want those two phases, the issuance and the redemption, to be unlinkable. We call this property blindness because, of course, we want the blinding to be efficient enough that you can't know what number is behind the blackened out message. In other words, the redemption should contain no information about the issuance and thus cannot be linked back to it. So this is the one perspective, to preserve anonymity. On the other hand, we still want this whole thing to be secure. For this, we assume the user to be malicious. That's why we use like this little mascot thing. And of course, this means that this adversary can't honestly generate the certificate. The only other way they have to access the service is to forge this signature that the signing server would have put on to the blinded message. And of course, we do not want this. I think this is quite intuitive. We call this unforgeability, and we just don't want it to be feasible for an adversary to forge a valid signature. Okay, so we have two parties. We have the user that wants to access the service and stay anonymous. We have Apple who wants to stay secure. I hope you understood kind of what I was going for here. Just remember, for blind signatures, we have the user, a signing party who verifies like the authentication information, and then the verifier, in this case, Apple Intelligence. And now let's look at how Apple realized privacy-preserving authentication, because it's not as easy as just slapping this basic building block onto a real-life system. For this, of course, we again start with the user. And Apple actually implemented two separate blind signatures for the purpose of authentication. So we start with the first blind signature, and as you remember, we have a signing party. to which we send our authentication information. In this case, the PCC identity service. We receive back a blinded token. They call this token the token granting token, and you will see very shortly on why they call it the token granting token, that the user can, of course, unblind for themselves. So this is the first blind signature, the token granting token that is being signed by the PCC identity service. In the next phase, so this phase is only done once. So each user only has to authenticate themselves once with Apple. And after that, they can use their token granting token that cannot be linked back to their identity to receive a batch of one-time tokens. So they send their token granting token, TGT, to the token granting service, catchy name, I know. And the token granting service can then verify that the token granting token is valid and send back like a whole bunch of so-called one-time tokens that the user again can unblind. So why are we doing this? This seems a bit redundant. Why can't we just receive like a whole bunch of token granting tokens or just one-time token? The idea here is that each one-time token is not linkable to another one-time token. So each time I want to actually query an Apple Intelligence request, Apple does not know that those two requests come from the same person. At least in theory, that's what they were going for. You also see the third-party gateway here, and the whole purpose of the third-party gateway is so that IP addresses of users stay like hidden. So that's like their whole purpose here in this protocol. For the communication with the PCC identity service, this is of course not necessary because the PCC identity service knows your identity anyways. Okay, so now the user actually wants to query an Apple Intelligence request. For that, they take the, and the PCC node is like the goal here. So this is the entity that computes the Apple Intelligence request. The user now takes the prompt that is going to be sent to the PCC nodes and their token granting token, and they're encrypting both of these things together. They're encrypting it in a way so that only the PCC node can actually decrypt this, the prompt. Because in the prompt, your whole data could be revealed. If you're, for example, trying to rewrite your resume, your personal data is inside the prompt. So this is what we want to protect. Now, we send this encrypted request body alongside the one-time token to the so-called PCC gateway. The PCC gateway manages like the traffic that is being sent to the different PCC nodes. And they verify that the one-time token is valid and then just send the encrypted request to the PCC node where it is decrypted, and then, the response is computed. Because this is where authentication basically stops. This is just the part that we analyzed. Yeah. So, how do we now cryptographically analyze this PCC system that I just presented? For this, we have generally two basic steps. First of all, we want to formalize the whole system. So you've seen the protocol I just showed you. We want to formalize it in a manner that we can then do mathematical proofs on them. Of course, this means we can't just stop at what I just presented. We really have to define what entities we have and what their goal is, what they are exactly doing, and putting that in like really mathematical functions that we can then analyze. Because the time I have is pretty short, we will not do this second step, and we will instead just focus on the very high-level idea of formalizing the PCC system. Of course, if you have questions afterwards, you can come to me and we can discuss like how the second step would work. For the first step, we have to build two separate models. First of all, the system model. I think this is pretty intuitive. We have to define like what do these entities do and how do their functions work. On the other hand, we have the so-called security model. This is where we really have to think what security and privacy does the system try to achieve. And we also have to mathematically formalize this. And then we combine everything together in the mathematical analysis to prove security. Yeah, so let's start with the first step. What did we do here? I think you already know this system model. And the first thing is that we kind of abstract entities and omit them if we don't need them for authentication in this case. The third-party gateway is the first entity to go here because it does not meaningfully contribute to authentication. It really just forwards all the traffic between the user and Apple. Of course, we still, if we would formulate this in like a paper or something, we would still formulate assumptions based on this omission. So you would have to say that all traffic remains, so that the IP address remains hidden in this case. We have a lot of PCC nodes here right now, and for authentication, it doesn't actually matter that there are so many nodes, so we will only consider one for the system model. This, of course, enables like a multitude of attacks, theoretically, but for authentication, these attacks are out of scope. So we are not trying to analyze these specific attacks. We are just trying to analyze authentication. So omission of all but one node here is totally fine. OK, so I will not go into the detail about what each user is now doing and the functions that we formalized in our system model, because this would just take too much time. So we will go on to the security model. In the security model, like I said, we have to remember what do we want to achieve security and privacy-wise here. And for this, the first question we asked ourselves was, what does Apple say? And they did a security guide for Apple Private Cloud Compute, and we read through all of that. Here's a little excerpt. It's like just a very small excerpt from the very long guide. And you can see they do very like talking about their security and privacy guarantees. They even write that security researchers need to be able to verify with a high degree of confidence that our privacy and security guarantees for PCC match our public promises. The thing is, you could assume now that when they're talking so much about security and privacy guarantees, they would actually tell us what they mean by that, but they don't. So this was like a large problem for us. They do like to talk about how they do not reveal your data, but that you can remain private, but this is not detailed enough for a cryptographic analysis. This is far too large of an interpretation room. So we had to take some more sophisticated guesses on what privacy and security they want to achieve here by looking at what they did, because if they did this or that security measure, it kind of implies they want this or that property to hold. OK, so we have like these two sides, privacy for the user and security for the system. We will start with some privacy properties. Like I said, we have these two separate blind signatures, one for the TGT and one for the OTT. We want both of those to be blind. But this shows that we have to always think in the context of the real-life model that we are actually trying to analyze here, because just wanting privacy for those two blind signatures is really not enough. For example, there are multiple ways to determine if a request comes from the same user, or so two different requests if they come from the same user, or from two different ones. Of course, the OTTs are one side of that, but we don't only send the OTT to the gateway, and we do often reuse our TGT. So we have to make sure that the overarching protocol is somehow privacy preserving and that two of your requests can't be linked back to each other. Even if they can't be linked back to specifically you, this would enable like just profiling. We called this security property untraceability. Okay, for the security properties, we of course have like the unforgeability properties again, but having two separate properties for unforgeability here might imply that having one is better than having none. But the truth is, if you have a TGT, if you can forge a TGT, you can of course not honestly, but yeah, semi-honestly get a bunch of OTTs signed. So if we have TGT forgeability so that you can forge in TGT, you could just gain all the OTTs you want that are honestly signed. And if you can sign an OTT, you can simply send it to the PCC gateway and gain access to the system that way. So having one of those is not enough. It's as bad as having none of those two. So this is another thing you have to consider when cryptographically analyzing the system. You may need a third property that combines those two to really say what is important in this system. Also, this is not the only way that a malicious user could gain access to the PCC service. If I'm an honest Apple user and I have lots of Linux friends or something, I can just generate a bunch of OTTs and give them to all my friends. So there's nothing here that prevents me from doing that. Of course, knowing Apple and like their philosophy with their ecosystem, this is probably not something that they want. And we did find code excerpts where it seems like they do want to prevent this kind of behavior. And of course, we had to define the property for this for ourselves. We called it actually binding. And because it's such an interesting property and Apple is kind of contradictory in their documentation and guide about what they actually wanted to achieve in terms of binding, we will take a deeper look into it. So we defined different levels of what binding could mean in the context of the PCC service. And the first level, we will go like from the most secure version to the least secure version here, is to bind the request and the OTT to the user itself. This would of course mean you would need to forward to the PCC gateway some kind of identification so that the gateway could then check that your OTT matches your identification. This is really bad for privacy, so we won't do that. So we don't actually want this level of binding. The second one is the one that we found in Apple's code, that they actually want their OTT to be bind to the TGT itself. In terms of modeling, we would then have to consider where this binding is checked. It could be either checked at the gateway or at the PCC node. To check it at the gateway, we would have to decrypt the TGT, and this would of course enable like linking between different requests because we only have one single TGT as a user, so that's also probably not the right way to do it. Instead, we could just forward the OTT along to the PCC node. It seems like this is what Apple is trying to do. The third and least secure option here would be to just require a valid TGT. So like I said, the TGT is actually inside this encrypted request body. The node can just decrypt it and verify that it is a valid TGT. And it would at least prevent you from just having to, being able to distribute your OTTs without actually having to, attach your TGT. So in this case, you would have to give your TGT up as well. And this could be bad for you because Apple claims that they plan to do some abuse mitigation, and it seems like they want to use the TGT for that. Yeah, so let's do a little summary. What did we learn? I hope you learned a lot about how private cloud compute operates, at least like the authentication side of it. I hope you learned something about blind signatures and how to actually formalize, how to cryptographically formalize a system. We still have some open questions that I want to emphasize again. Apple is very secretive and does not really define what they mean by security and privacy, and it really is bad for us cryptographers who want to really mathematically prove that these guarantees actually hold, especially because Apple does seem to want us to prove them. They actually, it is sad that they don't define what they mean by binding as well, because it's such an interesting property. And like I said, they do have code for this, so it seems like they want to enable binding in some way, but it could potentially compromise privacy in some regards. So we would really like for Apple to actually define what they mean by that. And last but not least, this is just the authentication part of the protocol. We would need to expand or remodel like the whole thing to prove security and privacy for the whole system. Yes, you can contact me under this email address, and that's it. Thank you for listening.